Okay, well, maybe it's time
Focus here.
to focus on to
The nonviolent Jesus.
Yeah.
nonviolent Jesus. We're not going to talk about guns anymore. At least I hope not. We're on chapter 21. Prior to that is an opening meditation. And I thought since the book is called Say to This Mountain, I would show you a picture of a mountain. And
Is that where you were?
I was up on that mountain.
And where is that?
That's in Rocky Mountain National Park.
Oh,
And it was quite an experience. We were there in the park for 12 days and did probably about 14 hikes in 12 days.
nice.
So now I'm back down to earth. It was
Just a lower elevation.
a long fall.
You're just at a lower elevation.
Yeah,
You come down from the mountain top.
yes, right. So anyhow,
You kind of do look like Moses now.
yeah,
Or is it? A glow got it.
He does have kind of a glow.
Shine.
you mean I have a glow? Oh, well, anyhow, the chapter has an opening meditation. And the authors focus on this verse from Mark 14:9. Truly, I tell you, wherever the good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her. Who's her?
One of the nameless women in the Bible who brings an alabaster jar filled with oil.
Yep.
Fragrant oil, I assume.
It's also been interpreted as her is the good news. But what's interesting is they go into a nice discussion of the dinner party by Judy Chicago. I don't know how many of you have read that opening meditation.
Oh,
And so I'm always curious to follow up on what specific references are. And the dinner party is I think you have to call it a modern art object. This is a permanent installation with a triangular table. Has 39 place settings. You started out, I think, with 13 or 14 and then ended up with 39. It's they talk about it being portrait of these 39 women, but they're heavily symbolic. I mean, there's only one or two that actually has something that looks like a face. And they're in fabric and embroidery and weavings. And it features images of women whose stories were never adequately told. And so that, I think that the kickoff point for the authors is that the woman who anointed the head of Jesus' oil with perfume really, with nard, her story is never really adequately told. So they go into this discussion, and there are hundreds of other names in addition to those 39. There are hundreds of other names of women. So all women that are inscribed on the floor and under the table. And in this particular image, you can see Judith. You can see, if you look down, you see Jezebel, you see Deborah, Miriam. And these are biblical names, people who show up in the Bible. And again, the authors are saying their stories, and Chicago, Judy Chicago, the artist, saying these people's story were never fully told. They're not all often remembered. And regarding the names on the floor, they had to have someone who made a worthwhile contribution to society. They tried to improve the lot of other women. Her life and work had illuminated significant aspects of women's history. And finally, they had to provide a role model for a more egalitarian future between men and women. So anyhow, there was a 1979 book that includes all 1,038 names in it. Here's Sojourner Truth. Here's her plate. That's one of the ones that actually has a face on it. Part of this art installation. And it's permanently installed at the Elizabeth Sackler Center for Feminist Arts. If you're ever over that way, you can take a look at it. And there's lots more details if you care to do a little Google search on it. You can find a lot more detail.
Have you been, Jonathan?
Pardon?
Have you been?
No.
I think there was one website that had all the place settings. You could look at the whole.
Yes.
Maybe that's where you got those from.
Yes. Yeah. So there are several out there that show either some or all of the place settings. I was trying to find a list of names of all 1,038 women, and I couldn't find them. So I guess it was a little too tedious for somebody to to write them down and then post them. But
We're gonna spend the rest of the hour reading the names.
that's what I'd hoped to do, really. Could make my life easier. So, to you, consider this: what is the purpose of the dinner party? I've already kind of answered that.
I was
To
gonna,
highlight what person can make a difference.
Well,
Yeah.
it might be just to follow what they had in the book about in remembrance of her, whoever her is.
Yeah.
Acknowledge all those unnamed.
yeah,
So the next question then is, why have the authors mentioned the artwork in the open meditation? And I think we've kind of answered that also. It really is to pinpoint the many contributions of women who are not recognized. And if you, we'll cover this a little bit more later, but if you think about it, the book of Mark's, the Passion story begins with the anointing of Jesus by a woman. And how does it end?
and being prepared by being anointed by two women.
Okay, but even more than that, what happens when the women go to the tomb? Who goes to the tomb? Women.
Yeah,
Women go to. And so the author says this shows the stupidity of, I'm using my words, the stupidity of men, that the disciples didn't bother to go to the tomb to check and see if he was there. It was the women who anointed him, and reminiscent of being a king, and the women who went to find out, to try to minister him even after death.
Yeah.
And the men were where?
hiding.
Good. Yeah, hiding.
Well, they were, yeah, so historically, they've been a marginalized group. It's like the other groups that we've been talking about. That the authors are interested in providing justice for.
But I thought it was interesting that, these guys said in Mark, Jesus said that her story would be told all the time, and then they go and point out that it isn't.
Yeah,
It isn't. It isn't.
Well, that made me wonder something, historically. There's been times when, what if they had been in there? What if the women's names had been in and had been taken out because they wanted to make it a more patriarchal society, and they wanted to, and when I say they, I'm talking about men in leadership roles. Over time, they could have been lost because of that, partly because it was an intentional drawing to that patriarchal.
Well, I must confess that thought has crossed my mind also, that as the church developed into a more patriarchal society, and it really came out of a patriarchal society, Judaism, and as it developed, it reverted back to that. And so the names of the women and their stories were less important, unfortunately.
well, and if you look at Paul's writings, he had a lot of women. I mean, they were patrons, they ran the house churches.
So, are there women in the Gospel of Mark who have spoken to you by their discipleship and willingness to cross boundaries?
Name them.
Name them.
Can't name them. Well, there's Mary, several Marys.
Right?
I've been watching that shows, and it's so interesting with women that were among the Bible that, I never had my brain around that before.
Syrophoenician woman who wanted to be healed, but because she was Syrophoenician was
Yes.
even more off to the margins,
Well,
I
it was
guess.
even for, wasn't it for her daughter?
Her daughter.
Was it for her daughter?
Yeah.
Okay, and, you know, yeah, that was the one they were talking about, even
Right,
the crumbs of the meal, you know, are given to
Yeah.
the dogs.
Yeah.
What they brought up.
Well, and then there was the woman who had faith enough that she reached out and touched Jesus' hem and was healed after she had been put into poverty and visiting all those doctors who basically didn't heal her.
And how much do we know about those women?
The name is still.
Yeah,
Your faith.
Yeah, most are nameless.
yeah. Even Jairus's daughter doesn't have a name. It's just his daughter.
Well, then, I thought I'd give you a list of all the women, and you fit some of them. Mary, Peter's mother-in-law, daughter of Jairus, the wife of Jairus, woman with a blood issue, which Pearl just mentioned, Christ's sisters, Herodias, Herodias' daughter, Syrophoenician woman, and it goes on and on. And if you look at them, very few of them are really named. Yeah, Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joseph. You know, and basically Mary and Martha. There really aren't many. Most of them are also ran characters. So, are there women in your life whose stories are important to remember? Name them. Sorry, no men allowed. You-
I would
No
say
men's names.
I
but
would
just-
say both my grandmothers. They were both strong women, but in different ways. My mother's mother was more quiet and submissive, but had a core of strength. And my father's mother was widowed early. My father hadn't yet turned 4 when he died. And so she went back, she ran the farm and then was teaching again. But they were both believed strongly in the church and, you know, set good examples for their communities and their children and grandchildren.
And their names are?
Well, my father's mother is, I won't say her first name because she always said if anybody called her by her first name, she'd come back on us. So it's M. Coral Argetsinger Weiss. And then my other grandmother is Elizabeth Marie what's her maiden name? Jessen Adams.
So is your real name Coral or is that your middle name?
Nope, that's my first
That's
name.
your first name.
Yeah. They never would have called me by her, although we both have M's in our names we do not use. Although mine's Marie.
Family
So,
tradition.
Jonathan, to go back to the names of women, do you think the women that were not named were not real characters, but just Jesus telling stories to prove a point?
I don't think so. I really don't think so. I think that
When you
Women
think of all
were-
those women,
I think women were among the first real disciples. But it's a patriarchal society.
You may not have known their names. Because most of them are general characters, not
Right.
specific.
and each of those stories
Yeah.
had a point
Mhm.
to teach us.
Well, and one of the names that was left out was Mary and Martha, the sisters.
But are they in Mark?
Oh, I don't know, maybe not.
That's what we have to be.
Yeah,
Actually, I think you're right. I mentioned, I don't think they are in Mark.
I don't think they are. I think they're in a different.
Matthew, I believe.
I threw their names in. Sorry, you caught me.
I'm just trying to remember. So I can remember, I have to say my mother, Patricia Ann Parker's not here. She broke the glass ceiling. She fought for education when she was told all you need is enough education to find a husband. She did that and then went on. Got 2 master's degrees. When my father went under appointment, he had to go to the School of Restoration for appointing classes. And the wives were supposed to go to the wives' classes and learn to be good housekeepers and manage the money. And she said, no, I'm going with my husband to his classes. She got the highest grades in the class, typed his papers, typed her papers, and was in a photo in the Herald shaking hands with W.W. Wallace for being the first one to do that.
Girls in schools in a lot of countries.
Yeah.
Always get better grades. than boys.
Yeah,
And they type everybody's paper.
Yeah.
And that was back before computers, so,
Well, that's
Correct.
like Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
yep, she did that too. That's another one.
When her husband was
Yeah.
sick, she
Yep.
took notes for his. Well,
Yep, she did it too.
he very
So
good
that's the
story.
first one. And then I know going back, Sarah Richards, my great grandmother, she supported her husband to be a missionary. And he traveled. He was a miner. He would go do the dynamite because it was the quickest, shortest job, paid the most. Then he could get on the train and go do missionary work. But she had to stay home and tend the house and boarders and the children and all that. And I know, what's her first name? Butterworth. What's her first name? Can't think of it. Yeah, Miss.
Oh, you're getting in trouble there.
Yeah. Well, no, that's not right. Oh, why can't I think of your name, Grandma? Like my 4th great grandmother, she went to, her sister, little sister was sick and they had checked everywhere. They lived in England. And, she went to, temp revival by our early missionaries. And they, prayed for her and the little girl was healed and she walked home. And they converted to the church and came over and ended up in Iowa and had a big brood of children. And one of her sons was the first apostle to go to, I was telling you about that, Australia and many other, what is the council that Jerry was?
Standing.
I don't know what his name is. So going back, some of them braved to come across the ocean with their families, and others braved going across the Oregon Trail, keeping their family together. So I feel very proud of the women in my family. And I know there are many, many, many through history who are in need.
I would name my mother Dorothy, just because of the woman that she was, the way she lived and taught the family. And I would also name my 7th grade Sunday school, or my 7th grade teacher, because when I was in 4th grade, I was totally humiliated in front of my class, and I hated school after that. And I was humiliated by a teacher that made a comment that set the whole class laughing at me, and then they teased me about it afterwards. So I hated school after that. And my parents built a home down outside of Fort Scott, Kansas. And I was blessed to attend a 2-room schoolhouse that year. And I only got to live there, go to it for 1 year, but it was all 8 grades in 2 classrooms. And we had, the only water in the building was, we had 1 sink that we all used to dipper to drink out of and wash our hands. We had 2 outhouses, 1 on each side of the baseball field out behind the school. But my teacher, Mrs. Wimberly, changed my entire outlook on school just because of the way she was, the way she taught, and she made me feel whole again. So Mrs. Wimberly had a large, huge impact on my life that one year. And
Well,
so
I don't think we could
experience of going to a 2-room schoolhouse.
let this go by without naming this lady in the corner. It includes a lot of us. Tell me about it. Oh, my goodness. Eloise Snyder. Hi, Eloise. So, correct me if I'm wrong, you were one of the first women in the priesthood. Ordained. Values family above all. I'll start by.
And kept John in mind.
That's exactly,
I'm not-
that's exactly what I was saying.
but I'm lucky to be included as one of them.
Definitely John's better half.
I can remember many times when John would start saying something. Ella would say, no, John, no.
Conscience. John's conscience. Well, I'll just quickly say my grandmother Mabel, my maternal grandmother, was the one who found the church and moved the family to Independence, without whom my parents would never have met, and I would never. I'd be cosmic vapor right now. Been born. So, I mean, that's pretty important to me.
And what was her name?
Mabel Lundgren.
Mabel, that's right.
His other grandmother, Mabel, had a child who had Down syndrome in an era when they would say, "Well," and she didn't, and she created an entire community support system for handicapped children in what, 40s? Early 50s?
Early 50s.
Yeah. In a time when it
Stephen
was,
was
yeah,
born in, like, 47.
laws made to support handicapped people weren't created until the 70s.
Yeah, there were, when I was a
Amazing, too.
small child, there were 2 Down syndrome. One I've lost since we left Blue Springs, I don't know. But one of them was, his parents went to college with my dad, so they've been lifelong friends. And they set up a scouting group to support. Mhm. So Danny got to participate in scouting along with his older brothers.
Well, thank you for sharing those names.
I want to mention before
Yes.
we go
Go ahead.
past the unnamed women, there's another group of women that don't even get mentioned. There's no stories in the Bible about the wives of the apostles of the count of the 12. You know, they're not even.
Yeah.
Peter's mother-in-law gets mentioned, but you always wonder what did their wives do when these guys were out there with Jesus? You know, what were they? I kind of like.
Good point.
Yeah,
They're raising their kids and figuring out
how to,
a society that women cannot make a living.
yeah. And their husbands were not making a living while they were,
Not gonna bring home the fish anymore.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe some of them were tip makers like Tabitha, was that her name?
She was a weaver of lavender or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk about women in the first century a little bit more if we have time here. So let's get on to Mark 14. The first verse and second verse read, "Now the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread were only 2 days away, and the chief priests and the teachers of the law were scheming to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or the people may riot." So what is the Passion story? When does it start?
For us or by them?
Mark, you mean?
I mean, Passover or Passion?
Passion story.
Well, in our time, it's from Palm Sunday to Easter.
And so what happens on Palm Sunday?
Jesus comes to Jerusalem.
The triumphal entry
Entry.
of Jesus to Jerusalem. And what happens at the very end of the story?
Well, he's crucified and 3 days later rises from the dead.
Okay, so for the Jews, what's the Passover?
Exodus.
Okay,
When the angel of death goes
and
by them.
pardon?
When the angel of death goes over their home.
Okay.
Because they have the
Okay, so they must slaughter a lamb. God tells them to slaughter a lamb, put it over the door.
doorpost.
Smear the
dwelling,
blood,
and be
not the
passed
lamb.
over. Yeah, the blood of the lamb, sorry. I must be more specific.
I wonder if they ever used a neighborhood lamb in all the families, because they may not have all been able to afford a lamb.
I have to be careful with this class. I have to be very specific.
Hey, Samuel, why do you have that lamb tied to your door?
So while he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume?" So what's nard?
It's a very expensive oil. It has scents added to it, essential oils added to it.
Still used a lot.
Mhm.
It's still used a lot today.
It's the dictionary says oil derived from an aromatic plant, sorry, in the honeysuckle family, and has been used for centuries in religious and other kinds of use. So
Eloise, could you buy it today? It's something called nard? No, we don't. It's not called nard.
It's just, it's the ingredient.
Essential oils. And there's various brands, like doTERRA is the big one. Right, right. One of the purest. It's one of the purest.
Well, this one says it's from the Valerian family.
I've never heard that word nard associated with it, but it's the same.
okay. Okay, so
It
anyhow,
smells like
it is a
fruity, spicy.
it's a perfume. It's something that you anoint someone's body with. It's good smelling.
It has healing.
It has
Yeah.
healing qualities.
It says here a plant producing a much prized fragrant oil used as a perfume, a sedative, and a medicinal herb.
I think it's called spikenard now.
Yeah,
I think I actually bought some for a class sometime. If I can find it, I'll bring it in. I have a bottle somewhere. It may not be any good anymore. I'll see if I can find it.
It may be past smell test or it's,
It was okay. I was not anything. I mean, I like patchouli oil better, but
what did pure nard smell like? Nard or spikenard is a pale yellow or amber colored liquid with a heavy, sweet, woody, spicy animal odor, similar to valerian oil.
that's what I would say. Woody is probably a good description.
does it, do you question the fact that she broke the jar and poured it?
Why do you have to break it? I mean, it's sealed up or something?
Maybe
Why do
you have to
break
seal.
the jar? Sounds like a translation thing.
She should have taken the lid off.
Maybe the top was sealed or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seal.
Broke the
Yeah.
seal, maybe.
Okay, what does that symbolize? We kind of mentioned it earlier. What does that anointing of the oil symbolize?
Well, and one answer would be that in the Old Testament, prophets anointed kings. Became king, they were anointed. So this could be, I'm not sure you can get that from the script, but it could be that the woman's taking the prophet's role and anointing the king, could be the symbolic thing.
Yeah.
But then,
Interesting.
but then it also talks about, you know, kind of like foretelling her anointing his body in preparation for death.
Well, I guess the one other thing I thought of was like breaking it. She was going to use all of it. I mean, she wasn't throwing it out a little bit. She gave the all of it.
She wasn't just dabbing a little on the sport.
Yeah.
Well, you know, they didn't say how big it is. If
Doesn't
it's
matter.
expensive, it might be a
It's
little
not gonna
tiny
go back
perfume
in.
bottle for
If
you.
it's broken, it's
Yeah.
not gonna go back in.
So who is the woman?
I thought,
Dennis says she's a prophet.
Mary.
Mary.
that was interesting. The author suggested that she was a prostitute
Prostitute.
because, you know, I guess to have the ability to purchase something like that.
Or she could have been just a rich woman.
Yeah, but I've never heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that suggested about Mary Magdalene, which I think
Yeah.
most scholars would say that's not true, but
Now, some
That's
the
how
first
to,
time I've
that
heard
Catholic.
it's associated with that.
definitely how to downplay a woman is to
Yeah.
label her that.
Does this repeat or parallel another story about Jesus?
besides that,
Other
besides going to the tomb.
Okay.
Is there another story besides that?
There's another word,
Maybe.
the woman who washed his feet.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of.
And,
Okay.
and
Dried it with her
Judas
hair.
gets mad because
Yeah.
One of the wise men brought myrrh to the birth.
Okay. So there are several anointings. What's interesting is that other women do anoint Jesus during this Passover Passion time period. So Matthew and Mark basically talk about at the home of Simon the leper, and say that it prepares Jesus for death, for birth, burial, and resurrection. So that's one. Matthew and Mark seem to be in agreement. Although in Matthew, the disciples criticize her use of the oil. In Mark, it's just people in general. Then there's John, in the Gospel of John. Mary, sister of Martha, and Lazarus anoints Jesus' feet, and Judas criticizes her, and that's at Mary and Martha's home. So that's seems to be a different story, although some scholars think these are all variations of the same. Then there's Luke, when an unnamed sinful woman, which is not, her sinfulness is not even hinted at in the other gospels. So where the authors studying Mark alone come up with saying she's a prostitute is questionable. It's in Simon the Pharisee's home, not Simon the leper. And there's no mention of Bethany. The other three versions talk about this happening in Bethany. The woman comes up behind Jesus. He reclines at the dinner table. She weeps at his feet. This is the one you just mentioned. Sorrowful for her sinful actions. Her tears fall on Jesus' feet. She uses her hair to dry them, and pour his perfume on his feet. So, in some cases, he's anointed the head, sometimes the feet, and that these could be three different accounts. It could be one account that simply transfigures or transforms over the telling.
So he was blessed head to toe.
Yes, yes. And I put a picture up of the only jar I could find that's first century, and I don't think that's a small jar. There probably were smaller jars. I mean, they all would have been homemade.
That looks like it's made of clay.
Yeah.
And it was an alabaster jar, which would be smaller because it's not,
It's not quite as
what it's made
pumpy.
of.
But this is something that happened from modern culture, which shocking to us,
Mhm.
not something we participate in. ceremony or honor that women that restore on them, part of their culture.
I mean, every commentary I've read seems to indicate it's indicative of kingship, of of honoring him as king of the Jews. Now, whether it was done other times, I'm sure it was. I'm sure that others were. Is that an alabaster?
That's
one?
an ancient alabaster jar.
Oh, okay.
It might be similar.
You had better luck searching.
This is from the 4th or 5th century BC.
Like a vial.
So it's hard to tell from that whether it's actually sealed and she could break it, or whether it actually had a lid that you could open up.
You can buy it for $2,500.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's.
Well, I'm
Pocket
willing
change.
if the class wants to chip in. I think we could do it.
So Jonathan, you're saying the anointing was more honoring than healing.
I guess I'm saying both, but all the commentaries that I read indicate that for Jesus, this was a symbol of his kingship, similar to when the kings of old were anointed on the head with oil by the prophet of that time.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the story of Samuel anointing David. That's the first king.
Okay, so verse 5. It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor, and they rebuked her harshly. It says they, we don't know who they is in Mark. Leave her alone, said Jesus. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. So what's the beautiful thing? Anointing his head with.
Sacrifice of it.
Yeah,
The beautiful thing is that she knows what's going to happen to Jesus. She knows he's going to have to go to the cross.
Okay.
So that's one reason that she anoints him.
Okay.
So she already feels within her being that she believes about what Jesus tells his disciples, who a lot of them, oh, that will never happen, surely. And that's another thing about Judas, is Judas has an error in his thinking. You see, he gets the 30 pieces of silver, but he thinks that Jesus will miraculously convince the Sanhedrin that he is the Messiah, or that somehow he'll get out of not having to go to the cross. Well, that's Judas's big mistake. And that's one reason he goes and hangs himself later, because he realizes, oh boy, did I really blow it this time.
So what you're saying really ties in with what Jenna said earlier. She may not have been a prophet, but she had some prophetic insight into what was coming for Jesus. And so she comforts him and anoints him with oil.
Well, if you have prophetic insight, aren't you a prophet?
You're a prophetess. Prophetess, yes.
Maybe Judas was thinking, I should have listened to that lady.
So how much was a year's wage?
Well, in the scripture it said 300 denarii, which, as I understand it, a denarii was like a day laborer's one wage, for 1 day's labor.
Yeah, it was 300 denarii would be 300 days labor. And today, everything I can find in the case is about $534.53. Now that varies depending on the country, and it's hard to equate from that to this, but I mean, I think we all realize that our daily wages here in the US are far higher than what they would be in other places, because they're saying that $534 change is a year's wage, not a day's, a year's wage. And one reference had the denarii worth $1.78 and change compared to ours. And these are countries, Algeria, Iraq, Jordan, others that still use the denarii today, or the dinar. And you can see the exchange rate varies all the way from $2.65 the US for one denarii all the way down to 18 cents.
What was the buying power of 30 pieces of silver?
I don't know. But what I've read is obviously it was a day's wage. One denarii would be a day's wage, and so that would 7 of them would have to be enough to get you through a week.
Yeah, but what's appalling though is there are people still today living on that.
Exactly.
2000.
The worst one was Iraq. I don't know if you noticed it. It was 0.00069.
Yeah.
That was really bad.
Now, of course, these will have been buried even since I pulled them off the web, because obviously the exchange rate goes up and down, up and down.
When we went over to see my sister in Thailand, that was 35 years or so ago. And at that time, the average Thai wage was $3 a day. Still parts of the world that are
Yes.
very underpaid.
So verse 7, the poor you will always have with you, and you cannot help them anytime you want. And you can help them anytime you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. So Jesus is even saying she's preparing me for burial.
Now, the authors have a little different translation of that.
Which is,
You will always be among the poor and can do the right thing for them at any time. Their own translation.
Yeah.
That's a little different.
well, how different? Explain to me the difference between what you just read and what is on the
Well, the way I read their translation is they're saying you're supposed to be among the poor. Instead of the poor being with you, you're supposed to be among the poor. That's where your mission is, or your place. Right.
I have tried to find the version that the authors use, and they switch around from one version to another.
Yeah.
Earlier on, they were using the Common English Bible, and more recently, they're using the Revised Standard Anglicized version.
Well, they don't cite where that's from.
Yeah, so they don't always quote the version, but they have picked and choose, as we all do, the version that they want to emphasize.
Because that in that paragraph it says this saying is notoriously used in the history of the church to justify the existence of poverty. But they say it's a statement not about the poor, but about the social location of the discipleship church.
So before we talk a little bit more about what Dennis just brought up, in the Anglicized version, New Revised Standard, there's a footnote for B, and it refers to Deuteronomy 15:11. And that verse says that since there will never cease to be some in need on the earth, I therefore command you, open your hand to the poor and needy neighbor, in your land. I didn't read that very well, but I think you get the gist of it. So it refers back to Deuteronomy, and that also saying there will never cease to be people in need. Therefore, open your hand to the poor, the needy in your neighborhood. And I have a question. Were you previously aware of the second half of the first sentence in verse 7? And I'm talking about the part that says, and you can help them anytime you want. See, I think I've heard the poor will always be with you always.
Yeah.
Period.
Not always at me.
Right. How many times have you heard that second part? and you can help them anytime you want.
I don't think I've ever heard it until today.
And what did the version the authors say? I thought that was.
Well, you will always be among the poor and can do the right thing for them at any time. Nobody's holding back. You're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Like yourself. Like that.
Yeah. Well, I just found it interesting that in all the times that I've heard about the poor will be with you always, I've never heard the second part of that sentence.
It kind of, they'll always be with you still, there's not much.
Yeah.
I've always had that view.
If you take the first part,
Say,
yeah,
they'll always be with you. So, you know,
exactly.
there's not much you can change. I think that's unfair.
Yeah.
I think there are things we can change, maybe not all of them, but
Yeah.
there's, I think it was reflecting the culture.
Mhm.
It's the poor, it's not what you can do about it.
I don't know if you'd say it's the culture just back then.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's easier, more convenient to simply say,
Yeah.
the poor you will always have with you.
Right.
It's a little more challenging to say, and you can help them anytime you want.
Great thing is to help.
Yeah.
This is where.
Well, to me, it's kind of inferred um, in the way that we've always heard it. To me, that infers that, you know, you've got them with you all the time and you can do what you want, you know, do what you need to help. But
No, I
even though it doesn't
agree. I
say
think the church has always taught that we reach out to the poor people who need our support and assistance. But I just find it interesting that I've never heard the second half of that until I started reading this particular chapter.
So we're driving down Mission Road, say you're gonna stop there in the corner.
Say again?
As you drive down Mission Road today, you're gonna stop down here in the corner.
The guy that stands
The guy that stands, he's
95th.
standing today,
Stand-
not sitting.
there every.
Well, I'll turn the question back on you. What are you gonna do?
Sometimes
they stop, sometimes they don't. But I think they mentioned, you know, that this is often used for, you know, why churches today maybe don't always help people. They say, well, we're gonna help them anytime. They're always gonna be here. And I wonder if that was an original quote or if that was something that maybe got put in later. I don't know.
I was gonna say, if I have water near bottles of water, sometimes hand those out.
You know, in Judaism, there are certain times to do the, what's it called, the mikvot, when they do good deeds for others. It's not like every minute of every day, and certainly not on the Sabbath, so I wonder if that had a bearing too.
John and I went to a concert, the ball player of his sang in. So whenever they sang around the city, we always went. Those. And the one day it was the president of City Union Mission was their intermission speaker. They always had a speaker because all the money went to some organization. So that particular day, he gave us a lecture on the people on the corner. And it's really stuck with me. And he said, if you really want to help them, you don't just hand out.
Yeah.
That enables them. Send them, if you could possibly figure out a way to send them to us. We try to heal everything, the brain, the body, the spirit. And he said, just think about it. Because when you give them a 5, it's probably going to go to alcohol
or cigarettes.
or cigarettes. And so he said, pray about it, but think about it, how you want to help in the long run. So I thought, well, how do you get somebody on the bus? You know,
Well, and some of them don't want to go there.
They
I mean, I
don't
get
want
that
to.
they can be a neighbor, but
yeah.
that we still have shortages of beds for people.
Yeah,
not trying to make excuses, but you know, you.
Well, then
all of that
what
stuff.
they did was open up another one to help, so they could treat more people.
But I know one day I saw a man and it was really, really cold and I handed him some money. And as I was giving it to him, I said, stay warm tonight, because this will.
This will
get a
help.
hotel."
Well, the
Our
ones that
motel, there
get
was a
me
place
are
in
the
front.
young ones, the younger ones, and they'll have a sign, they've got children. And I'm like, oh, you know, it just does me in, but
Where they have the kids sitting with them. They're
Yeah.
like,
yeah, the one there on 119 is usually alone, but it's a hard call. It's a hard call.
Because, you know, there are a lot of cons
Yeah.
as well. There's the actual needs people. There's people who park their car, car, nicer than my car.
Yeah,
Around the corner, you gotta be careful.
Well, I'll give Ron a straight answer. The straight answer is, I have decided, at least in my life, I'm going to do charitable works where I know they will have some effect. So I very seldom, although I very seldom give money to people on the street corners. But I do, I think you know, I volunteer at Operation Breakthrough. I give them money and toys and things for the kids to use down there. I make a habit of every time there's a Center for Hope collection day, if I miss the day, I at least bring something to church. So every time Robin collects, I bring at least a package of something. And if I miss a week, I bring 2 or 3 so to make up for it. And I do support City Mission. I do support a number of other groups that help people. But my choice has been, except for a few times when I've felt exceptionally moved to do so, I donate through organizations. Now, I was down at the plaza a couple of years ago and saw a gentleman walk in. He asked for a cup of coffee and I bought him a gift. You know, that way I know it's not going to alcohol or cigarettes, and that's my own personal bias. I'd rather help. So no, I probably won't stop at the corner and give the guy some money, but I will do some other things that I think want to help more. So that's my straight answer.
You know, that has always been kind of my take on it. Whether it be a special needs summer camp.
Yeah.
With disadvantaged Mediocre,
Exactly.
Centerfold, the school supply thing. I can remember when I first started talking about school supplies and some of you were there. You know, but that's something we can do because this time of year, it's just kind of, and we've done that for years, the paper goods, all those kinds of things that for Centerfold, which I think, okay, that's going to help the needy. And that's, I struggle a little bit with this stuff. I have given them granola bars, bottled water, you know, so I've done some of that kind of thing, but I struggle with the 5 to 1 or whatever.
Yeah.
But I totally agree with you on, there are so many organizations that have an infrastructure designed to help. So let's see if we can help the organization that has that. That makes sense. I'm thinking of oblation here at church, which, but you know, there's a limit to how much oblation someone can receive. I didn't know that for a long time, but there really is. And there are some people that have maxed out that.
It's a lifetime one.
Right. Yeah, it's a lifetime limit.
Not
But
per year.
so what is that? But I totally agree with that concept. And Outreach International to me is similar kinds of things. Which, so I feel like we've got a lot of places that hopefully our donations or whatever will be of a benefit.
I think that the dilemma, I do both. I give out money when I pass people that, you know, if they're in such a state that they've got to stand on the street corner and beg for money, a few bucks is not going to hurt me. And I support all those kinds of organizations we're talking about. And I like, you know, what Eloise said. Unfortunately, as good as those organizations are at treating the whole person, there is not enough of that. There's not even close to enough of that available. And if an alcoholic is on the street corner because he needs a drink, that's his business. That's between him and God. My donation to him is between me and God. The problem is you can't get him into rehab. There's not enough healthcare in this country to treat all of the mental illness for all of the people who are out on the streets. And I don't have time to sort all that out, but I keep dollar bills in my car right next to me in the little cubby hole you call it. And if I see somebody, I don't ask. That's, I give them some money. The story always was, I came to your door and you turned me away, and now you're calling for me to be with you now. So how do I know which one is Jesus? That's kind of my thinking, is I have to feel like I'm doing something because I think Jesus would. My grandmother used to say, when she was a patient in the hospital one time, we were walking after her surgery up and down the hall, and we looked in the room, and there was a poor, pathetic, kind of homeless looking guy with tubes and stuff coming out everywhere. He looked really miserable. And she just said to me, and all she said to me was, Jesus would not pass that one by. And I just can't pass them by. I just can't. And, Lynn Matthews years ago, we disagreed on some things, but she said something to me that changed my thinking about this. And she said, if he's an alcoholic, if he's a drug addict, and wants a fix, if he wants a drink, that's what he needs right then. And that's true. If you understand addiction, that's what they need right at that moment. And I'm not advocating being a facilitator anyway. But again, I just have to do it because I think it would do this. I gotta go get ready for church.
Well, I think there's a bigger question that you can ask is, why are there poor? Then you're talking about a society and a more of a kind of like a structural issue is, why are there poor? Martin Luther King has heard one time, he was talking about the story of the Good Samaritan. And we all know how the story goes. But he said something like, well, he would help the guy, but he said, what I would do, this is paraphrasing as I remember it is, he said, I would do something to fix that road so the bandits weren't there anymore. Something in a bigger solution than just solving the one guy's problem. Fix it so there weren't bandits there robbing people and beating them up and making them half dead. That was what he thought had been done with Good Samaritan story in the real world.
As a society, mental health facilities that used to be available have just lost their funding in the last 50 years. And I wonder why the homeless population has increased. It's a bigger picture.
Well, we're out of time.
Happy note.
Yes. I have all this stuff I was going to share with you, but I'm not going to share it with you. What I want to do is I want to go to the very end and tell you that next Sunday, if I can find it. We had a lot of scripture. What I would strongly suggest you do is go through and read this chapter if you haven't already, and read the verse and consider it. Take a hard look at it. Next week, prayer is staying awake. And I'll tell you just a little funny on me. When I first read this, I thought it said prayer is staying alive. And so on this slide, I was going to have a picture of John Travolta. The Staying Alive movie, but I decided I better stick. Then I reread and realized I didn't read right. So anyhow, next Sunday, and I think it's is it fall?
Is it the first Sunday?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, it's fall next Sunday.
I think the first Sunday.
Thank you.